Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Abby Bartlett, and I'm Chair of the Nursing and Justice and Forensic Healthcare Forum. And we're here today at the Royal College of Nursing to launch our new exhibition on the history of nursing in prisons, co-curated with nursing staff from the Justice and Forensic Healthcare Forum and the History of Nursing Forum. So I'd like to offer a huge thank you to all of you who've contributed to the exhibition and volunteered the time. As you can see, it's taken a long time to prepare. So I did History A-level and loved the stories and the ability to track the progress, the decisions and change that explains to us the reasons why we're here at the point we are today, for good or for bad. And one of our forum projects last year was to examine what trauma-informed care means to people working in prison. And I think you can see how important thinking about this is when you consider the history of prison nursing and what nurses do in prison today. Catherine Pine and Gertrude Townsend were two nurses who set up a nursing home to care for suffragettes when they were released from prison. They helped suffragettes recover after they'd been on hunger strike, including Emmeline Pankhurst. And just imagine how hard they must have worked and how determined they were to make a difference and the trauma that they absorbed hearing their patients' experiences. Today, more than 20% of the prisoners are held in conditions that are classed as crowded. People in prison have got complex healthcare needs, often with a background of trauma. Nurses working in a secure setting work hard to ensure the equivalence of care, that is, that people get the same level of care that you or I receive. They work in difficult conditions and witness some really distressing things. Having a trauma-informed, compassionate approach to the nursing workforce is essential to maintain a committed workforce and to avoid burnout and compassion fatigue. As Chair of the Nursing and Justice and Forensic Healthcare Forum, which is a bit of a mouthful, my role is to lead our committee to celebrate and shine a light on nursing in the secure setting. Collaboration with others makes our reach greater and our impact stronger. Therefore, I'd like to say a huge thank you so much to the library team and to Diane and the rest of the History of Nursing Forum for putting this together with us. It really does demonstrate the power of collaboration and the vital contribution nurses make to secure health today. So I would like to hand over to Liz Walsh, our professional lead, who is going to chair tonight.
Great, thanks, Abby. How exciting is this? How excited am I? So we've been in the queue for the exhibition space for some time now. So this is a very big day for us in the world of prison nursing. Great to see so many people here, both in person and online. So thank you for joining. So who am I? So as Abby said, I am the UK professional lead for Justice and Forensic Healthcare here at the Royal College of Nursing. I'm a general nurse by background, and I have been working in and around prison nursing since I qualified in 1995, which feels to be about 10 years ago, but it isn't. I appreciate that. I've had a number of roles in clinical practice, in education, in development and inspection prior to my arrival here at the Royal College of Nursing. So I want to start things off with something I am really excited to share with you. So during one of our exhibition planning meetings, we wondered if there were any famous people we could invite along to this evening who had experience of imprisonment. So following a little bit of reflection and consideration of a few people, we decided to approach Stephen Fry. Unfortunately, he is busy this evening, but in correspondence with his PA, I did ask if he would be amenable to sending us a video message. She asked if we would like a cheery message of support, but I decided to ask for a little bit more. Perhaps he could read some of the Oscar Wilde's Ballad of Reading Gaol for us and send us some of his reflections of being in prison. Give us the prisoner perspective of prison, both of old via the writings of Oscar Wilde. This is a history exhibition after all, and more recently from his own experience. So a little cheeky maybe, but he played Oscar Wilde so wonderfully, we decided it was worth asking and went on to share the link to the section of the reading I thought would be particularly good for us to hear. imagine our excitement when he sent us this short film. So here he is, Stephen Fry, to open our session this evening. Thank you, Stephen. Please enjoy.
This is The Ballad of Reading Gaol by Oscar Wilde, or part of it at least. I know not whether laws be right, or whether laws be wrong. All that we know who lie in jail is that the wall is strong, and that each day is like a year whose days are long. But this I know, that every law that men have made for man, since first man took his brother's life and the sad world began, but straws the wheat and saves the chaff with the most evil fan. This too I know, and wise it were if each could know the same, that every prison that men build is built with bricks of shame, and bound with bars, lest Christ should see how men their brothers maim. With bars they blur the gracious moon, and blind the goodly sun, and they do well to hide their hell, for in it things are done that Son of God nor Son of Man ever should look upon. The vilest deeds, like poison weeds, bloom well in prison air. It is only what is good in man that wastes and withers there. Pale anguish keeps the heavy gate, and the warder is despair. For they starve the little frightened child till it weeps both night and day, and they scourge the weak and flog the fool and gibe the old and grey, and some grow mad, and all grow bad, and none a word may say. Each narrow cell in which we dwell is a foul and dark latrine, and the fetid breath of living death chokes up each grated screen, and all but lust is turned to dust in humanity's machine. The brackish water that we drink creeps with a loathsome slime, and the bitter bread they weigh in scales is full of chalk and lime, and sleep will not lie down, but walks wild-eyed and cries to time. But though lean hunger and green thirst like asp with adder fight, we have little care of prison fare, for what chills and kills outright is that every stone one lifts by day becomes one's heart by night, with midnight always in one's heart and twilight in one's cell. We turn the crank or tear the rope, each in his separate hell, and the silence is more awful far than the sound of a brazen bell. And never a human voice comes near to speak a gentle word, and the eye that watches through the door is pitiless and hard, and by all forgot we rot and rot, with soul and body marred. And thus we rust life's iron chain, degraded and alone, and some men curse, and some men weep, and some men make no moan, but God's eternal laws are kind, and break the heart of stone. In Reading Gaol by Reading Town there is a pit of shame, and in it lies a wretched man, eaten by teeth of flame. In a burning winding sheet he lies, and his grave has got no name. And there, till Christ call forth the dead, in silence let him lie. No need to waste the foolish tear, or heave the windy sigh. The man had killed the thing he loved, and so he had to die. And all men kill the thing they love. By all let this be heard. Some do it with a bitter look, some with a flattering word. The coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword. Well, hello everybody. I was in prison nearly 50 years ago, actually. I was 17, 18, credit card fraud. And I saw things there that still haunt me in a strange way. Sometimes I have dreams and I'm back there, even though I was only, 4 or 5 months in this awaiting trial on remand. But I was a convict because I'd pleaded. So, I saw some of the worst of it. But particularly I saw the distress, I saw the fact that so many of my fellow convicts, prisoners, were really troubled in the mind and had never really had any sympathy or understanding extended to them. There were some who tried it on, of course, but actually pretending to have mental ill health is as difficult as pretending to have physical ill health, really. You'll get found out, and it's so unfair on the others who really are struggling. But most prisoners, like people on the outside, are afraid to talk because it sounds like a weakness, and weakness in prison, as we know, can be very dangerous, very difficult to live your life if you're considered a victim or someone easy to bully, easy to steal from, easy to ignore. I mean, that makes your time here much harder. So people want to be strong, and so they hide their problems, their anxieties, their fears, their distress, their depression, or indeed even their wildness and their psychotic episodes. All these things are very strong. They need people to talk to. They need someone to talk to. They need properly qualified health professionals who really can see what's up with them and suggest things, because there's so much going against mental health. I mean, the very fact that you're locked up is not good for the mind. The very fact that you're working out what it is you did and how much you regret it and how you want your life to change and whether you have any control over your life, whether your mind stops you from having control over your life, whether you are master of your fate and captain of your soul. There are so many questions, so many things that seem difficult to ask without showing weakness, as I say. That's particularly true of men. Obviously, I can't speak for women convicts quite so clearly, but I know they have problems too, and just as much need to talk and to be understood. And so anybody who comes into the prison, anybody who's either a health professional or a visitor who's there to help, someone who really understands, is incredibly useful, someone with whom you can have private conversations and talk about a way through and how to manage it, how to cope, how to get through the day, still feeling proud and intact in yourself. All these things are big questions, and goodness me, I do want you to understand there are people out there who care. They really are. They're pretty rare, because a lot of the world doesn't care, but there are those who do, who are on your side, and who want to help. So give them a chance to. That's what I'm saying. Even at the risk of showing sides of yourself you're not happy to show necessarily. But I think once you do, once you understand that your privacy is respected and that your feelings are respected, I think you'll find it really helpful. So I wish you all the very best.
Well, what a way to start us off, eh? Thanks, Stephen. My favourite part of Stephen's message is when he tells us that there are people who care when a lot of the world doesn't. Worth noting, as prison nurses are those people who care. So, time to reflect with this evening's panel on the world of healthcare in prison and the development of nursing. In the exhibition, you can see how nurses have become more increasingly involved in the provision of prison healthcare, so I don't plan to repeat that here. However, I think it is worth recapping on some of the key milestones over the last 30 years or so, as prison healthcare services in the UK moved from being directly provided by prison services to being brought into more mainstream healthcare services. This was prompted by Sir David Ramsbotham, the then Chief Inspector of Prisons, who in 1996 published Patient or Prisoner. His report focused on healthcare in prison, recommending that the National Health Service should assume responsibility for all healthcare in prisons. The report highlighted the importance of providing prisoners with healthcare of the same quality and range as the public, emphasising that failure to do so could put society at risk. So since 2004, when responsibility for prison healthcare moved to the Department of Health, we have seen huge strides in improvements in healthcare for prisoners and an increasingly important role for nurses and nursing care. Bear in mind, this is only during the last 20 years, so still recent, in my mind at least. So let me introduce our panel this evening. We have asked them to spend 10 minutes or so each reflecting on their experiences of prison, and then we will take questions once we have heard from everyone, if that's okay. So, if you want to raise your hand, have a wave at the audience. Anne Norman is a retired nurse and past Royal College of Nursing professional advisor for Nursing and Justice Services. She previously worked as a prison nurse and as Assistant Director of Nursing within the Department of Health Prison Health Task Force. Next, we have Sobanen Narathiran, who is the CEO of Breakthrough Social Enterprise, a social enterprise that supports underserved people to enter the world of technology. He has lived experience of the criminal justice system, which has opened his eyes to the suffering and sadness that exists within our prison walls. And finally, we have Donna Goddard, who has worked within Health and Justice Services in clinical leadership and service management roles. She is a strong advocate for providing career progression and professional development for nurses working in these settings. Donna's PhD research explores prison nursing identity from a historical perspective, using oral history as her methodology. I can't wait to hear from these guys. This is going to be a really, really interesting panel. So let's start with Anne, if that's okay with you, Anne. So could you tell us a bit about your experiences of being a nurse in prison? I mean, how did you get into it for a start?
Thank you very much, Liz. Good evening, everybody. I'd first like to say a huge thank you to Liz, the forums, and to the RCN for hosting this event and for inviting me to be a part of it. It's really difficult to follow Stephen Fry, so thanks for that, but, you know, somebody's got to do it. So when I was asked to participate in this event, my initial thought was we've come an awful long way in a relatively short space of time. But this is a long journey and we face very many challenges ahead, as many of you will know. I know that by pooling our collective energy, we can improve services in prisons further for staff and for the people who reside in them. I've been a nurse for 43 years and I retired from the RCN as professional lead in 2021. I know I look much too young, and this is where you gasp in disbelief. But today I'd like to take you back to 1995, some 30 years ago. Back then I'd considered myself a fairly experienced nurse with a broad background, a range of experience in hospitals, community, acute, primary and end-of-life care. At that time, I was seeking a new professional opportunity in a different sphere of nursing, and I didn't quite know what. But again, in 1995, I seized that opportunity and embarked on a career in prison nursing, and that was in an old Victorian local remand prison in the south of England. Oh, well, it's Winchester, actually, if anybody wants to know. I was then one of the very few new so-called civilian nurses recruited at a time when there was a shift in government policy, as Liz has said, which encouraged registered nurses to work in prisons and helped to professionalise nursing care, which needed to be very much equivalent to the wider NHS. The prison service had then, within its existing workforce, the healthcare officer, or HCO, as many of you will know. They had some historical healthcare training of sorts, but no ongoing professional development and no professional nursing accountability to a regulatory body, as nurses have. Healthcare officers were accountable to the prison governor, also who had no nursing qualifications. Some do, I think, but generally a governor isn't a registered nurse. My new role in the prison was certainly a baptism of fire, and I had to learn very quickly the rules and regulations of the prison. Safety and security, as you might imagine, were critically important. In those early days, I was offered, with some other civilian nurses from around other prisons, a 2-week jailcraft course at the Prison Service Training College in Rugby. This included managing two-way radios, managing violence and safety of staff and of self, using keys, and that's just a few things, much more. In my day-to-day role as at the prison, I was mainly delivering primary care as a practice nurse would at your local surgery. I witnessed good care, bad care, and care that was not commonly evidence-based. It was really hard, as you might imagine, but important to professionally challenge poor care. And in doing this, you can imagine it makes you very unpopular. Many prison nurses will recognise this fact. It was also very important to have mutual respect for your colleagues as you work truly in a multi-professional team. My view then, and still now, is that if you work as a prison governor who's receptive to good healthcare delivery, officers who understand and appreciate the value of good nursing care, and with good leadership in nursing, then a good service will follow. We always make an analogy of having the right ingredients in the recipe. If one of or more of those elements or ingredients is missing, there is a much bigger challenge for all of us. For my first day in the prison, prisoners were commonly referred to by their prison numbers, which I found dehumanising and unprofessional. Rather than outwardly challenge these traditional practices, I always addressed my patients by their name. Over time, I think I was seen as less of a threat and found that prison staff became more trusting of my approach and experience. At least I hope so. I'm not declaring here that all people in prison are sweetness and joy, and neither are they all monsters, as the tabloids would have you believe. As a nurse, I had to deliver a service to all, equivalent to that of the wider NHS, just as you or I would expect, but without prejudice. This can be harder than you think, but in all areas of nursing, that's what being a professional is, just as in teaching or other similar professions. Now, at the same time back then, working in the prison, I called upon my professional body and union, the RCN, for support. It was very much needed. There was no prison nursing forum back then. Prison nurses were commonly seen as novel, curious place to work, or as a bit of an odd career choice. Many people didn't even realise that nurses were beginning to work in prisons. I'd lobbied the RCN along with other colleagues fairly hard to get more robust support, calling for the establishment of a forum. And this was achieved in due course and helped massively in getting this area of practice on the map. There's been a great deal since written and researched in prison healthcare, and I know many of you here have contributed to that agenda. We owe you a huge gratitude, a debt of gratitude, and I thank you personally. In terms of evolution, a lot has changed over the past 30 years, much that we can be proud of, but as we solve some issues, we identify new difficulties. Overcrowding is far from being resolved. Drugs in prisons, self-harm, assaults on staff and other prisoners. And a new word I found when I was looking up, thinking about, I wanted to try and find the right word for a topical issue at the moment. Well, I'll probably pronounce it wrongly, but protestalizer. Come and ask me for the spelling later if you want, but it's a term that's used by anyone who actively tries to persuade others to adopt their religious beliefs. And that's one of the topics that seems to be quite a common issue and a challenge in prisons at the moment. There are many big questions that still need answers. How do we create the space for rehabilitation? Are short-term sentences counterproductive? Are mental health care services sufficient to meet the high unmet need? I still do believe that we better understand our patients' health needs, our own needs, and the service needs. Whether they're all being met is another conversation, and there's insufficient time to cover that today. As citizens, we all tread a very thin line between good and being a good person and a bad person. Any one of us at any moment could breach the law, consciously or unconsciously, and ultimately we could be indeed detained at His Majesty's pleasure. This is why we must treat all citizens with dignity and care. As a nurse, we must never lose sight of the importance of a professional and compassionate service, and professionals who are efficient, effective, but most of all kind. Now, if I've got a couple more minutes, I'd like to just give you an example, because I was asked for examples of sort of day-to-day issues. So here's one, I'll get the juices flowing. So I was on duty. I was probably about a year into my post, still learning on the job. It was a Friday evening, probably a Friday preceding a bank holiday, no doubt, because that's when all the problems happen, isn't it? Let's be honest. Shortage of staff in the prison, that was usual. I'm in the healthcare unit. We have a prisoner that's acutely ill, and I'm very concerned, and I've undertaken a clinical assessment of his needs. I'm concerned enough that he should be taken to hospital for treatment. I contact the duty governor. He comes into the healthcare unit, bearing in mind he won't have any experience in healthcare or nursing. I explain the situation to him. The governor then refuses to let the prisoner go to hospital, citing shortage of staff. The governor states that I should manage his care in the prison. You can do that, you're the nurse. There are no escorts available. I explain the urgent need and point out carefully the reasons why I was employed for my clinical skills. I think I said something like, you're paying me for this job, and if you're not going to listen to what I'm going to say, which is quite confrontational, I might as well go. The governor's still reluctant. I explain that I will document in the clinical record my concerns and my recommendations. I ask the governor to sign, but he becomes uncomfortable. I stress that if we were to meet in a coroner's court, this would be the worst case scenario. The governor arranges for the safe transfer of the prisoner, where he was successfully treated. This was uncomfortable, and it was a standoff. I ended up trembling in my shoes, thinking, oh my God, it's not nice to have that sort of confrontation, but it had to be had. Otherwise, why would you recruit a nurse or a doctor? The moral here is sometimes conflict can be avoided and other solutions found, but sometimes you have to stand your ground. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow. Yeah, stand your ground. Anyway, more of that later. So thank you so much. We will have questions, but like I say, we'll do that at the end. And online, I believe there is a question function for you to type in your questions. We will monitor that. We will look at that. So please do start asking your questions. Okay, so next, can we hear from Sobanan? Lovely to have you with us. So would you like to come up here? Do you want to stay there? I don't mind. Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
So I feel like it's a really perfect carry on from what you're saying, but whenever I talk about prison, I like to start with a quote from Nelson Mandela, and it goes something like, don't judge a nation by how it treats its highest citizens, judge a nation by how it treats its lowest. If you want to know the truth of a nation, go inside its prison walls. And the reality is our nation is failing in multiple areas, and namely in prisons. I never expected to go to prison. I was an 18-year-old studying medicine at Plymouth University, someone really excited to get into the world of healthcare. But one thing led to another, and me and my best friend found ourselves in prison for a conspiracy to supply cannabis. And it was probably one of the biggest shocks of my life to go from someone who was highly esteemed and respected in society overnight to be a convicted drug dealer who officers, the institution, thought was scum of the earth in essence. And to be able to experience that from my unique lens, I had A-level grades, I could conversate with the Queen's English, I could write general apps, fill in complaint forms. I could only imagine what it was like for my peers who didn't have those privileges. Imagine being illiterate, suffering from severe mental health, being abused by your primary caregivers, being let down by institutions from the moment you were born, whether that was healthcare or the job centre or the local authority, to end up in a place where you're caged. Your voice is now less than it was on the outside, and the only people who can witness it are people like the people sitting in this room. They're prison officers, they're prisoners like myself who can come out and have a chance. And I think that's where we have a duty. We have a duty of care to the people in our prisons because ultimately they're a shadow of our society. Something you mentioned about religious beliefs, right? If you wanted to track back extremism, you could track it right back to a prison. Far-right extremism, Islamic extremism, it all starts in there. And I witnessed that firsthand. But how openly is that spoken about by the general public? We all know the crisis that's happening with sex offenders. How often is that spoken about by the general public? And we see this vicious cycle that appears where government refuses to acknowledge the issues we're facing. The staff in our prisons often are acting out of a sheer place of fear and anxiety. You don't want to piss off the governor, you don't want to piss off senior officers because they might make your job harder. But that's the thing, evil happens when good men stand by and do nothing. And ultimately, we've done nothing about our prison system for way too long. For me, I consider it luck, like an act of God that I ended up in prison, because it pissed me off enough to come out and have a fire in my belly to go, all of these people are voiceless. My mum used to visit me every single weekend. And I remember we would sit there and we would talk about all the people in there who never got a visit. They didn't have family. They would use spice, or they would self-harm or commit suicide because that sheer feeling of disconnection. To know that no one out here cares about your life, to know no one in there cares about your life, and people look at you like you're scum of the earth day in, day out. It's the reason that it's much easier to smoke spice than it is to actually engage in any traditional institutional rehabilitation. But I think the key element, and the thing that one of the reasons I feel really privileged to be invited here, is that throughout my experience in prison, nurses were the one place that there was safety. I remember my best mate and my co-defendant, and I don't think he'll mind me sharing this, but he refused to cut his toenails for the whole time we were in prison. So his toenails became ingrown, right? And we had a nurse on the wing who literally offered to sit with him and cut his nails for him and then give him a good telling off. And I remember sitting there and thinking in my head going, like, that's a maternal, that's a nurturing instinct. That's what we need more of in our society. No more jacked up prison officers who get excited by locking doors and bending people up. We need care, we need nurturing, we need compassion. Because every single person in prison is someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's brother, sister, mother, and father. And they just didn't get the same opportunities we did. They didn't have the same luck in life. And I think we owe it to ourselves, if we care about this country, to care about the people in there, because ultimately it's the same compassion we'd show ourselves. I'm sure every single person here has broken the law, whether it's speeding, drinking and driving, hopefully not, but whatever it is, you could end up in that situation as easily as someone else in there. And to know that what you do and what you do in, day out, can come back around is important. And it's going to be hard. It's hard to stand up to a system that's so far beyond like normal people's daily views. And I think that's part of the responsibility. Everyone here is a witness to the truth of this nation and a witness to the fact that we can do something about it. To hear how far nursing has come in that period of time, I think has really shown us that progress is possible, but it takes people to do hard things. It takes people to be selfless and to sacrifice that safety and being liked and having that belonging in order to make that change. But yeah, thank you.
I like to hang on to that. Prisoners are patient. They're someone's relative, someone's friend. Really important to consider that. But we need to move on and have questions at the end and more discussion. So thank you for that. Donna, it's your turn. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. None of us knew what we were going to be talking about. We were given sort of a brief, but they're all complementary, and they all make up the whole, and I'm sure you'll appreciate that. So I'm just going to start by just, for those who don't know, because there will be some probably who don't, in the United Kingdom, the UK Health and Justice Service nurses are guess what? I haven't got my specs. I can't see what I'm reading. There's always one, and it's usually me. Oh dear, sorry about that. So anyway, I'll start again. Oh, that's better. In the United Kingdom, Health and Justice Service nurses are a diverse group working across a range of contexts and settings, such as police custody, sexual assault referral centres, young offenders institutes, prisons and probation. Now, I've been asked to share a little bit about my recent PhD research as part of raising awareness of what prison nurses specifically do, because the work of prison nurses in the UK, believe it or not, is, although a lot's happened and we have got this wonderful event, and thank you all for organising it, it's fantastic. So, you know, we're getting on the map as, you know, a discipline, and it's really important because of all the things that Sobanan has said, and Liz has already said, and Stephen Fry has said, and Annie said, and that's the reason why you're working in this arena. But the work of prison nurses in the UK is still largely unseen, unrecognised, and suffering from poor recruitment and retention even now. And to date, there has been no research exploring how prison nurses manage their identity. And this will become clear as to why this is important within His Majesty's Prison Service now. But when I did my research, which is just finished, it was still Her Majesty's Prison Service. So, why is it important? Health constitutes one of the 7 strands to reducing reoffending. There's education, finance, home ownership, you know, there's a whole 7 of them, but I'll go off track, so I'm going to stick to my script. So health is one of them. So with prison nurses being in a unique position to make a positive and significant difference to health outcomes of this population, and so contribute to this target of reducing reoffending. Being in prison is very often, as we've already heard, the first time that a person with substance misuse issues or alcohol problems or complex physical and mental health needs, long-term conditions, has come into contact with healthcare, even maybe to have their primary immunisations because they missed them because they were absent from school, and to have the opportunity to address these before going back into the community. And so, as you can see, like we all are, we're really passionate, and like you are, passionate about this. So I had originally started my PhD journey with a question relating to the professional identity of nurses. And the project had been sparked by my previous experiences as a prison nurse and what I'd observed as a clinical nurse manager and then service manager for immigration and offender health. So as part of answering this question, I went to the British Library and the National Archives to explore the history of prison nursing in England and Wales, and as you will have seen from the exhibition, there was no mention of qualified nurses in the historiography of Her Majesty's Prison Service, aside from a small cohort who went into Holloway in 1919. And I just want to say something here. Given that nurses got registration in 1919, don't you think it's quite striking and a bit depressing to think that they weren't considered relevant until the mid-1980s? And that feeds into what Sobanan's saying about our attitude in society, potentially, of how we view people in prison. So anyway, so as I said, qualified nurses weren't introduced into the prisons until the 80s. So I basically broadened my research question to what were the experiences then of prison nurses working in English and Welsh prison settings between 1986 and 2022. I followed this up with subsidiary questions such as why did registered nurses consider a career in prison healthcare? How did they provide care in this prison establishment? And what influenced their decision to leave prison healthcare? So in answer to these questions, which I won't go into, I conducted in-depth oral history interviews with 13 former prison nurses. So I'm going to tell you just about one finding you'll be glad to know. I'm not going to go through the whole lot, but it's relevant to what we're talking about today. And that is that nurses enter the world of prisons, which we've already heard, and this phrase has been used, with a desire to make a difference and with a notion of what constituted a good nurse. And they kept their identity to the fore. And as Annie talked about just now, how she had to challenge that governor, that was keeping her prison nursing identity to the fore. She was advocating for that prisoner who needed to go out to hospital. He was acutely ill. And that is keeping your professional identity to the fore. However, there were challenges, and you've heard about some of the challenges. The nurses I interviewed over a 30-year span. They went in prison over that 30-year span. And they all faced challenges. They did not feel prepared. I remember Annie said it was a baptism of fire. All of them across all 3 decades, even those in the 21st century, said they did not feel prepared for their role within the prison environment. aspects of healthcare that would have been easy and or commonplace outside in the real world were anything but easy inside prison. Every healthcare request had to be negotiated and rationalised against a backdrop of security, as we heard. Reflecting now, this was when it first occurred to me that although we were caring for the same patient prisoner, prison officers and nurses were approaching it from a different stance. There was what has commonly been termed a custody versus care tension, and custody inevitably, because it was in a prison, took precedence. Now, bear with me. To explain why the custody and care tension exists, we need to consider two underlying ethical principles that contribute to our understanding of justice, and these are legal justice, of which prisons are a part, and social justice, in which healthcare is a part. The shorthand for this balance is often termed custody and caring. It is generally accepted that social justice, has four strands: equity, which is the fair treatment of people according to their needs; access, also known as equality; participation, means involving people in decisions that govern their lives; and rights, legal and moral, as in human rights. You can already see, can't you, that if you're in prison, social justice, achieving those things is really difficult. Legal justice refers to the fair and proper administration of law and the fair and equitable treatment of all individuals under the law. In the UK, the purpose of prison as part of the criminal justice system is seen to have three strands, and this was what Minister for Justice David Gauke said, and is protection of the public, punishment of the offender through deprivation of their liberty, end of, and rehabilitation. So, the nurses in my study started from a position of disadvantage, and we've heard this already, in terms of their ability to deliver healthcare in a socially just way when their patients were detained in prison as part of legal justice. So, for them, the approach to providing, socially just care in a legally just system and navigating this custody versus care tension was to manage their professional identity, their nursing identity, by keeping it to the fore. And one of the participants described it as keep applying the nursing brain, which was a reminder of their nurse professional identity. This is what I do, this is what I am, and this is what I do. That balance between the two. Now, going back to something Annie said earlier about our professional regulation, the identity of the professional nurse is prescribed by his or her regulatory body code of practice, which includes the ethical principle of social justice. Nurses are therefore primarily concerned with social justice. And the Nursing and Midwifery Council's code, which we have to abide by, is structured around four themes of prioritising people, that's our patients, practising effectively, that's doing good and not harm, preserving safety, getting that patient out to hospital if needed, and promoting professionalism and trust so that our patients can come and talk to us and we can build that rapport. The relevance to my participants was in their obvious social justice actions as a direct outworking of their professional identities as nurses, and what emerged through the participants' stories were strong examples of both innovative behaviour and innovative practice, often in response to regime challenges or structural difficulties. Significantly, despite a lack of positive facilitators, they still innovated. I'm nearly finished. The nurses had to be innovative and find workarounds so that they could care for their patients in a socially just manner, despite the structural constraints and regime restrictions that result from operating in a legally just system. So, why is professional identity that leads to innovative behaviour and practice important? Nursing innovation has been shown to directly increase the application of evidence to nursing practice and to impact positive patient outcomes. Nurses' agency and autonomy enable innovation, which in turn, this is important, fosters job satisfaction, improves retention, which is what we need for prison nurses and prison officers. We need to keep them, and reinforces a strong sense of professional identity. So what? Goal 3 of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Health and justice nurses, specifically I'm talking about prison nurses, are key contributors to achieving this and other related goals through nursing innovation within prison services. There are currently 11 million people incarcerated in prisons globally, which in public health terms poses a significant challenge as well as an opportunity. However, if there is a view that nurses are not needed in prison, then necessity to sustain a well-trained workforce is not imperative. Equally, if prisoners are still viewed as less eligible by virtue of the crimes they've committed, then their healthcare is not so important, and funding for infrastructure and services is not the highest priority. I'm finishing now. Given that most prisoners will return to their communities, then the health gains achieved whilst in prison have the chance of continuing on release, representing a health dividend for the communities to which they are returning, as well as contributing to reducing reoffending. It's a no-brainer. So we need to keep nurses and good prison officers, good nurses, good prison officers in the prison service. They are vital, and they are to carrying out social justice in a legally just environment. Thank you.
Got sparks flying off my pen here. I was like, oh, get that down. That's brilliant. Well, thanks, Donna. Really, really great. So I've got a few more questions to ask you guys, just for a little bit more discussion around your reflections on health care in prisons and how we think it's changed, and is it any better from the changes? So I'm going to ask you, Annie, what do you think's changed for better or worse since nurses have started working in prisons?
I gave this quite a lot of thought, and it's a bit of a, the scales of justice, the balance, because there's quite a lot of good stuff and quite a lot of bad stuff still. In terms of improvements, I would say certainly a much stronger awareness that nurses work in prisons, and we have come a long way, so I think that's a real plus. Still a lot to do, as I said before, but that's a fact. I would say standardisation of care equivalent to the NHS. Now, it's not right yet at all, but the expectation that people in prison should have the same standard level of care is a good thing. That's an improvement. And I would say a greater number of nurses and other healthcare professionals are choosing prison healthcare. Whether we get to keep them, as Donna was saying, is another debate. So those are the improvements. Some of the things that I think are worse, new challenges, insufficient investment to meet the needs, and I know that sounds as political with a small p, but I think I get tired of the various governments using staff that work in prisons as a pawn, and there's definitely unmet need. Still very high levels of violence and aggression, and that's something that should concern all of us, and that we need to look at that. And then not all prisons are fit for purpose. We still have a great deal of the old Victorian prisons, as I worked in. Still some new builds coming on the scene, but just because it's a shiny new prison doesn't mean it's good care. And just because it's an old prison doesn't mean it's bad care. And finally, I would say just insufficient security measures to deal with the infiltration of drugs and cell phones, those sorts of things.
Thank you. Again, lots of sparks off my pen here because there's a lot to unpick there. But interested from your perspective, Sobnan, what do you think? I mean, because your experience. I mean, I love that nurse with the guy with the toenails. I mean, that's something I just can't get out of my head now. Thank you. So I think there's something there about your experience of nurses in prison and what you think of that.
Yeah. So I think my experience of nurses in prison is that they are, so like I always used to imagine a nurse being like, generally when a nurse came onto a wing, she'd have officers with her, right? Like, and that was one of the things that I found like it's almost ridiculous, right? Like 2 bodyguards, where the nurse is the least likely person ever for a prisoner to do anything again, but it allows the prison officers to feel like, I don't know, I feel sometimes more masculine, I think, or like that follows the protocols, right? And there's this weird dynamic that I saw in prison where the nurses wanted to do the right thing all the time, but it's how often do they feel comfortable to voice that to an officer or voice that to a senior member of staff. And I think the example that you gave is really good, because the minute you make it a conversation about liability, you'll see all the prison officers back off, you'll see all the governors back off, and you'll see what needs to happen happens. But I think there's so, I guess, as this applies to the NHS, this applies in the community, it applies everywhere. I think nurses do such good work, but are so undervalued by the government, are undervalued by the wider system. And I think there's that collective mindset of how does that happen in the criminal justice system, where the curtain is really drawn. Like I don't know if there's any books written by nurses about their like memoirs of their experiences in there, but if there are, I'd love to see that be distributed. But yeah.
Thanks for that idea.
Okay, nice.
That's great, thank you. Thank you so much. Donna, what do you think's happened for the better, for worse, since nurses turned up?
Well, some of what Annie said, so, but I'm going to repeat it. I think one of the things that we have seen is an increasing number of actual nurses going into prison work, but I'm afraid retention is problematic, and that is something that we need to look at, and there are ways forward for that, but so numbers increasing, but we're not keeping them. The challenges are too great, the structural restraints, the regime challenges. You can be in the middle of an episode of care with a patient and then there's lockdown, so everything ends. You know the thing. And this is your tension between social justice and legal justice. Very difficult. The thing that's really good still, nurses are still innovating. From all across the 30 years of the period that I was interviewing, I didn't interview them over 30 years, by the way, I'm not that old, but their span of their career was over 30 years, yeah? And they were innovating then in the middle 80s, and they're still innovating now in the 21st century. Nurses are good at workarounds, but we shouldn't have to be. But it's great that we're seeing that so that, our patients benefit. This isn't to do with nursing, but actually I thought one of the good things that came in was electronic patient records. I mean, how do you care for a patient if the notes are still on the prison van that's gone off to the next establishment, which happened frequently when I first went into prisons? So electronic patient records, and also the increasing rise of digital and use of digital technologies, which means that you can have, instant consultations so that patients can access expert healthcare in situ, which also helps reduce public risk, but also takes the pressure off officers because they don't have to go out. So what's worse and what's different is exactly what Annie said: overstretched workforce, prison officers and prison nurses, and under-resourcing of the service, which is really appalling, really. Overcrowding in prisons, and this means that prisoners, again, are subject to being relocated at short notice, potentially disrupting their health care. They might have just got a consultant's appointment and then they have to be moved. So increasing violence that puts other prisoners and prison staff at risk. And the other thing that's got worse is the increasing number of older prisoners, with the resultant rise in demand for healthcare resources, because people are dying of old age in prison now, or have, palliative conditions, and prison is not a good place for that, really. So I think those things are the worst, but there are some good things too.
Thanks, Donna. Really keen to focus on the good stuff. Part of the reason for this exhibition and the events that are going to follow from here is to raise the profile of prison nurses and improve the understanding of the public of what's going on in prisons. So Annie mentioned and Donna mentioned the high levels of violence and aggression, and we know that can affect people's decisions as to whether or not they want to work in a prison. But I was so pleased to hear you, Sobanen, say that nurse is the least person who's likely to be assaulted in a prison. In my experience, I've never felt safer. Because it's set up to help with that stuff. So we're keen on promoting prison healthcare as a career choice. We know that, so we talk about prisoners being marginalised and being hidden and who's really caring. And sometimes I'm not quite sure about our wider nursing community, how they view nurses working in prison, which is another reason why I'm really pleased that we've got this going on here. Because I know when I started working in prison, it was very much, why are you going there? That's career suicide. When actually, as Donna has been saying, this is about an innovative space where there's an awful lot of really good practice going on. I'm always really keen to promote the good stuff that's going on in prison. So we're raising the profile. We want the public to understand. We want our nursing colleagues to better understand what we're doing. But this is not to discount that the challenges of working in prison is really difficult. The moral distress, which you've alluded to, Soben, and that we've talked about when we've all spoken, it is huge. It's that social justice, what's the other one, justice, Donna? Legal justice. So the care, custody, priority thing is a challenge. The moral distress is real, but it's something that is close to my heart in trying to support nurses with. So I need to speak to you guys about what are your top 3 messages, do you think, for the future? What do you want people to leave here resonating in their minds? Annie?
Pretty simple, I think. I'll keep it simple. My first thing is a plea, and let's not be too quick to judge. I mean, it's a human instinct, isn't it, to judge somebody when you see them or when you hear them or the context of where they are, but just try and not be too quick to judge people. Second thing is think about the person beyond the behaviour, or try and understand the behaviour by understanding the person. And then for the nurses amongst you, really feel strongly about this. Remind ourselves why we came into the profession, and it's a profession and one that, you know, is really respected, and the good that we can do for society as well as the individual.
Thanks, Annie. How about you, Sobenan?
I think my first takeaway is, like, as a society, I think we're on the precipice of great change. Like, when you look at technology like artificial intelligence, it's going to impact every area of society, and prisons is not, like, no different. One of the easiest ways for the government to tackle our criminal justice crisis is just to use technology at every single angle they get, and people need to be informed. So make your voices involved in those discussions. The MOJ are building AI algorithms. Your voices should influence those algorithms as much as prison officers, governors, or anyone in the civil service. So yeah, please make your voices heard. I think number 2 is it's having those difficult conversations with people. Talk about things like extremism and what you see in prisons. Talk about things like sex offending and its rapid rise, and how are we going to tackle that as a society? Because until those difficult conversations are had, it's just going to be all kept in the closet, and we're just going to be wondering in 10 years' time why things have gotten worse. And I think the final point is, like, one of my biggest, I guess, like, things coming out of prison was, like, building my personal brand, going on social media, talking about my experiences, and allowing other people to discover the world of criminal justice that way. For those of you who have that in your lives or feel willing to do that, I would definitely encourage it, because prison nursing to me sounds very cool, but at the same time, people just aren't aware of that as a career path or the impact that they can have. And, you know, true crime podcasts and media are one of the most popular forms of it. So you can only imagine, when talking about your experiences, the impact that you could have both for prisoners and your occupation.
Thank you. Donna?
So I think that we need to help society to change its perceptions of people in prison as being less eligible. And that came in 1601 as the Poor Relief Act, Poor Law Relief Act, and was changed in 1834 to the Poor Law. And that's where this notion of lesser eligibility came in, and we've still got it today. There is still that narrative going on in certain areas and in government and policy and things like that. So we need to help society to change by doing the things that Sobenan said, really, getting the message out there. I really think nurses need to be better prepared for the role of prison nurse and the environment, so we retain them in their vital work. And prison officers and prison nurses care for the same individuals in prison. There needs to be better understanding of each other's roles, even now, and improved methods of collaborative working to the benefit of our prisoner patients.
So true. Thanks, Donna. So I think it's for me to thank all our speakers. Thank you all for attending, especially you guys online. And no, it's not easy being online and staying engaged, but it has been wonderful to have you with us. I think it's been a really great event. I'm really pleased that prison nursing is finally in the exhibition space and is now a thing, is now feeling more recognised by the nursing community. We have an evaluation survey, which you will see around. We would be really grateful if you would fill that in. The exhibition is open until, for 6 months, and then it moves to Edinburgh. So it will be open in the library. So do call in, tell your friends, get other people to come, open to the public. There are other events happening. So if you've seen one of these, it's not all about prisons. On the 18th of June, there is a care and custody online seminar around police matrons and police custody and nurses working there. There's also stuff around Broadmoor, drugs in prison, and our next event is on the 7th of May. It's online, and it is looking at dying well in prison settings, and that will be amazing, I'm sure. There is plenty more information in there. So thank you so much to everybody who has made this possible, particularly our volunteers, our History of Nursing Forum colleagues, and other members who have volunteered their time. We'd like to thank the Kessler Arts and NHS England for working in partnerships. If you've been down to the exhibition, you'll see some of the fabulous artwork down there. And finally, I would really like to thank the library and museum team, particularly Antonia, who has been running around with the microphone, and Sarah, just for pulling everything together and making it happen. So wonderful. Please do. We've got a few minutes downstairs if you want to go and quickly look at the exhibition if you haven't seen it. But like I say, we have to go by 8 o'clock. Antonia, Sarah, is that everything? Good. Thumbs up. Excellent. Marvellous. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. Thank you.